few things to address before I begin this video. Firstly, yes, I look like Jesse Pinkman in the latter half of Breaking Bad. Ha 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 ha. Secondly, this review was meant to come out months ago, but due to, well, life, I delayed the completion of this video until I could get it done, as it were. And thirdly, I just want to give a special thank out, special shout out to all the guest appearances on this video. I took the time to interview several good friends of mine online to get their thoughts and intake on Breaking Bad and why it's such an excellent series. And of course, my brother from another mother, Double A, and his excellent thumbnails that he's been providing for me for quite some time now. Thank you all so much for your patience, and thank you all so much for your contribution. Now, on with the review.
You clearly don't know who you're talking to, so let me clue you in. I am not in danger, Skylar. I am the danger. Say my name. Heisenberg. A guy opens his door and gets shot, and you think that of me? No. I am the one who knocks.
Well, everyone, I finally did it. I finally finished watching the final season of Breaking Bad, as well as finished watching the El Camino movie set after the events of Breaking Bad, which I'll get to later. Breaking Bad has been highly esteemed as one of the greatest television shows ever made. Period.
Thank you very much, evprince, for joining me on this endeavor to talk about why Breaking Bad is peak television. You've mentioned before that you're a big fan of Breaking Bad, and you also said you're even more of a big fan of of Better Call Saul, which is a topic for another time, but still worth mentioning nonetheless.
That's right, yeah. I very much like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. I think most people who have seen it at least once are pretty big fans of it.
I managed to invite Alecks, the dish smasher. What do you think of Breaking Bad as a show?
Well, I mean, I think it's a very unique show in that it kind of takes something very almost rudimentary, right? Or like banal.
That's
School teacher, right? Doing chemistry. And then he becomes this drug lord and a masterful manipulator. And I think it's fascinating to see such a transformation of a character.
So Breaking Bad, made by Vince Gilligan, is deemed as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, American television series ever created. Squidbear, you're obviously very enthusiastic about this series. What do you make of it?
It is the amore fati, love of fate, for anyone who gets cancer. I think that if anyone who's seen the show who gets cancer, they'd probably be tempted to do what Walt did.
Whenever people talk about the best quality entertainment you can get in a televised format, especially when it comes to the genre of crime drama, Breaking Bad is what usually immediately comes to mind as the standard.
The showrunner and the crew and the staff did such a good job in both of the main series and the film of executing so much of it in a mildly or even in some cases very realistic and believable way that there is a lot of, I think there's a lot of unspent suspension of disbelief that can be employed in places where it wouldn't normally be.
And that makes it like, unlike a lot of shows where it's like, you know, it already has all the superpowers, right? Or something like that. Here, he kind of undergoes a crisis in life, and he has to make a very massive transformation to compensate for it. And I think it kind of revels in its normalcy because it like dwells a lot on family everyday life and so on. So that's what I think of the show. It's very unique.
Ah, that's an interesting take there.
I decided to watch it for myself, and after an extensive period of time watching all the way from season 1 all the way to the final season, does the series live up to the hype? Yes. Yes, it does, and then some.
Yes! Hell yeah! Hey, come on, baby! Come on! Yes! Come on! Yes!
I can happily say without a shadow of a doubt that my time spent with this show was absolutely worth it. This is an excellently written show, this is a brilliantly character-driven show, and it's one of the best examples of setup and payoff that I've ever seen in any kind of entertainment.
It is filled with payoff.
Yup.
And people love payoff. People love setup and they love payoff. And it's because it makes them feel like they're involved with it almost, because they were there when it was set up. And so they feel like they're, oh, that's that. You know what I mean?
Yikes.
Certainly, the series has gained a reputation for being well acclaimed, as well as having a lot of memes.
The memes.
How do you think this show became meme-worthy?
That's just what happens we call it Americana, but really it's just what happens in a culture when a lot of people recognize something for whatever reason and they're aware of it.
Fair enough. There's a lot of funny ones out there. Ones where Walter and Jesse are playing Mario Kart, or ones where like Walter and
I love that one. That's a great one.
Yeah.
The editing in that is insane.
Yeah. Or others where like they're playing Minecraft, you have Walter up to a tree going.
Yeah, I've seen that one too.
Or one where Walter and various other characters from Better Call Saul are playing the red light, green light game from Squid Game.
You can move forward when it shouts out green light.
Probably mainly due to the fact that the show's creator, Vince Gilligan, didn't really take the premise that seriously at first. He came up with the series as a joke at first, but gradually developed it, and well, look where we are now.
Memes oftentimes, this isn't all of the time, but they come from, the term meme, the word meme just means like an idea that is spread and passed around. Kojima uses it in his game The Phantom Pain a lot, and some other ones, and it's
he used it
like
in Metal Gear Solid 2 as Revengeance, the memes.
but he was using it the way it actually means. We use the word memes on the internet now to refer to like funny images, but basically, it's the same reason the Star Wars movies get a lot of memes around them. It's just a lot of people have seen them, and it is a part of like the collective consciousness in that factor.
Would probably explain the fact that the show doesn't really take itself too seriously all the time, which certainly helps with its appeal.
Check the internet lately.
Yeah! Magnets! Oh!
Breaking Bad has many moments of levity because, frankly, Vince Gilligan balances drama and comedy exceptionally well.
The showrunner and the staff are very, very good at taking things just far enough and then executing them in a way that is believable.
That also works really well for the show, really. It works to the show's benefit because we don't take life too seriously, right? And that makes it still just handles everything with such realism. For instance, Jesse's stupidity is hilarious, but it's also realistic that someone would pour acid into a bathtub, then have it melt through the ceiling. That would happen.
Yeah.
So that makes it believable if it is a little bit stupid, right? So allowing stupidity makes it also more realistic.
Aye, makes sense. It's interesting you bring that up because in Breaking Bad's case, as you say, there is a lot of allowance for suspension of disbelief, and it helps that the show was originally conceived of as kind of a joke anyway. You can sense that throughout the show, it doesn't take itself too seriously. There are plenty of funny, goofy moments on purpose, and there's certainly other moments where it's dead serious. It's got that mixture all throughout the entire show, so whenever something goofy does happen, it's not completely out of the blue. It's fitting, as it were. And there's an appeal to that because on the one hand, characters talk like they're in some kind of one-liner western, but then the next moment they're in this really awkward situation where they're interrupting each other and they're having arguments. And so on and so forth.
But there are many more dark moments in the series. It is a drama after all.
So, what is Breaking Bad all about? Before I continue, I should note to my viewers that the show is a very adult-oriented show, and there's a lot of mention of drug use, sex, and other issues like that. The premise of Breaking Bad is set in New Mexico around the late 2000s, and it's centered on a family man by the name of Walter White, who works as an overly qualified high school chemistry teacher and simultaneously working at a car wash until one day he has serious coughing fits that are so severe he is taken straight to the hospital where he is diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. with this shocking revelation, as well as his economic need to provide for his pregnant wife, his daughter, and his disabled son, as well as living what he perceives to be a very unsatisfying, mundane life, which is limiting his own potential, Walter White decides to take action and turn to the most radical method of fundraising he possibly can. Team up with his former chemistry student turned criminal, Jesse Pinkman. Jesse! And get involved in the meth-making business. Much to his new partner Jesse's utter surprise, Walter is so skilled in the ways of chemistry that he's able to cook up the cleanest meth there is in the local area. 90% clean meth.
Something I've always said about story makers, or like applies for film, games, comics, anything, is that when you're writing a story, the burden of like preserving and cradling the audience's suspension of disbelief is entirely on you. My point of all of that is that Breaking Bad, which is the topic of it, one of the reasons people like it so much is that it does such a good job of making it easy for you to suspend your disbelief for stuff. Like, for instance, blue methamphetamine. I'm not an expert in crystal meth, but my understanding, based on some interviews, is that, although I look at it like the dark ass circles under my eyes, my understanding is that blue crystal meth makes no sense scientifically. I think I heard that listening to an interview with the series. That I don't think that's a real thing that would ever happen. They made that up. They made it up because it's weird for the show. It's like it's like, oh, it's blue. Why is it blue? It's iconic. It's interesting. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm misremembering. But the point is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it's blue. It doesn't matter why it's blue, because the audience doesn't care, because everything else is so believable.
So now that they've managed to achieve that, their next goal is to get the meth sold and distributed by the right people. And thus begins a long, extensive saga of Walter and Jesse clawing their way up the power structures of the criminal underworld whilst trying to remain out of trouble from the local police forces, especially Walter White's DEA brother-in-law, Hank. But as they claw their way through the criminal underworld, they come across a variety of people, some willing to help out, like a scam criminal lawyer.
Can I say something? Can you let them go? You already beat the living hell out of them. Do you think they're ever going to forget today? Never.
And others who are some of the most notorious villains in television history, ranging from outright degenerates, Mexican cartel family members, and other notorious figures working behind the scenes. Through all of it, will Walter White be able to raise the funds he desires to preserve his family's well-being long after he's gone? And if he does reach his goal, how much is enough? This is the kind of story where, even though there are a lot of memes about it, and a lot of people know quite a significant bunch about what's going to happen to certain characters. In case you're not aware, this is the kind of story that I don't want to give away that much to you, because there's a lot of great surprises. Like, even if you're familiar with the memes, the show can really still shock and surprise you. And obviously the main crux of this sense of surprise and shock mainly stems from the fact that this is Walter White's tragic story, in the fact that we see him go from what society would deem as a decent person, and then the more he claws his way through the criminal underworld, the more he loses what semblance of his moral integrity there was, to the point where by the final season, he is completely different from the person he once was.
Why cut us in? Mike is retiring from our crew. You've got the greatest meth cook in America. No, the two greatest meth cooks in America.
It's interesting you bring up the fact that it's a superhero. You could say that this is the story of a supervillain, perhaps, and how in some ways he doesn't change at all if you're paying attention, but at the same time there is this gradual change that happens over time. Perhaps this true nature, as it were.
Exactly.
Obviously, the fact that you brought it up in such a manner indicates that the character arc of Walter White, well, I mean, all the characters are great. It's just that the main attention is on Walter White's character arc and how he goes from what society would deem a suitable enough person to becoming an absolute monster of a man. What do you make of that character arc? front and central to the entire show.
Oh, that's exactly it. It is the most interesting aspect of it because it makes it a very personal story. It makes it very kind of tied to someone you're kind of rooting for, even as he kind of does evil things. And I mean, who wants to root for a drug lord? And I think that's a kind of an incredible achievement, right? That you end up siding with him a little bit. But it is also an interesting kind of psychological perspective you can make of it, because there's certainly some kind of memento mori as well. I kind of remember that you have to die, because Walter White is he's a very complacent character before being hit with the diagnosis of cancer, and
yes,
didn't have any control over his life. Skyler White has all these rules he has to follow, and then there's policeman, right?
Hank, the DEA.
Yeah, exactly, the DEA man, Hank. He also kind of walks over Walter White, and I think it all kind of adds up to show that he's a very complacent person who missed out on the big opportunities in life, and now that his life is about to be taken away from him, he wants to do something drastic to kind of get that achievement.
Honestly, watching through Breaking Bad is fairly similar to listening to a Dostoevsky novel like Crime and Punishment, where each different book within the story represents a different phase in the story. Let's say in Breaking Bad's case, each season is a book and each episode is like a new chapter. And certainly each episode seems to begin and end off like that. They have very distinct names for very distinct things that happen in them, especially by the ending. Usually the episodes don't really continue after these very overtly direct endings. Usually the big thing happens by the end and then fade to black, and it leaves the audience kind of wanting more, kind of like reading a book in that regard. And much like a Dostoevsky book, this story is a bit of a slow burn. So for that reason, it's probably a wee bit difficult to get into the first 3 seasons for most people. Not impossible, just a wee bit tricky because it is a slow burn. But honestly, this show becomes exceptionally amazing by the time it gets to season 4 and season 5. But even so, there's some brilliant stuff to be had in regards to deep conversations and character analysis with the first 3 seasons.
It's actually in the Brothers Karamazov. That's where the 700 first pages are like very rudimentary to get through. That's like the first few seasons. But I actually thoroughly enjoy this because you kind of forget to take your time and kind of forget to remember that these are just human beings, right? They have to eat, they have to interact with their family every day, they have to do their job, and that makes the show so relatable in a way. I think it is good that Breaking Bad takes its time the way it does.
Aye, seeing all these characters go about their mundane lives, how they go about their routines. Yeah. How they interact.
It has room for mundanity, and I think that's beautiful, really. I think that makes the show very artistic in the way it handles the mundane as something important.
Aye. So whenever something's out of place, you'll notice it all the more, I guess.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
You notice that. You notice all of these incredible and extreme details. Because of the fact that it has allowed itself to be mundane, so all of the other extreme elements become believable.
The series was kind of forming itself as it went along from season 1 all the way to season 3, with people basically making up as they went along. They were originally going to kill off Jesse before Aaron Paul managed to change their minds just by his performance. But by the time it gets to season 4 and season 5, you get the sense that they know what they're doing, and the show reaches its peak at season 4 and at season 5, especially season 5, which you have said is the most rewatchable season.
Yes, is the most, and why? It's because all the Chekhov guns are like shot off simultaneously through each episode of everything the show's been building up. It's a lot of like especially the first season is the hardest one to rewatch, like, because it honestly feels like the show is a bit ghosting you on rewatch, even though like when it's great when you're first watching it, but when you're rewatching it, it's like you're ghosting, like you're just way in anticipation, like it's like a turtle. You like just want to keep it, you want to go to momentum. But season 5, the momentum's all there. All the Chekhov guns have everything the show did not intendedly not act upon has now been acted in all episodes of season 5.
I think season 2 is actually a little bit harder to get through than season 1 in terms of like the kind of slow burn. Season 1 has enough wild things going for it that the slower stuff is balanced out. And I'm pretty sure season 1 is only like 6 episodes. I think the other seasons are longer.
Yeah, each episode is about an hour long or so.
Yeah, season 1's definitely a little bit. I think it goes quicker, and there's more things that happen. Like
That's
like
right.
the puddle of body matter that falls through Jesse's ceiling is pretty much the gore. Well, it's the goriest that the show ever gets, and it's in season 1. Like, I don't think it ever treads to that level of like insane stuff again.
Right, yeah. And even then, it's not like you're seeing all the elaborate bone parts. Those are just the remains of the liquids and just the awkwardness of, oh, it's melted through the top floor. Oops.
Yeah, I think you see like some bones. I think you see like a rib cage. And
right.
And like a red goop.
Yeah, the red goop. Can't forget the red goop. There's other details that are showcasing the ugly side of the criminal underworld later on, like the one woman who goes into drivers to suck their members, and people going to other kinds of depraved places, people like going on these drug parties, especially when Jesse wastes his money away on all these junkies at his house. They absolutely trash the place. That kind of stuff, and it's not portrayed in a positive light whatsoever. You see it for what it is. It's degenerate, it's disgusting, it's indulgent.
Exactly, and also the consequences of it, the consequences and the strains it causes on the relations. I think the comparison to Dostoevsky is just perfect, because from what I've heard, the first 700 pages of Dostoevsky, there's nothing going on, they're just talking. And that's perfect, that's beautiful, because you see these humans. And then the exciting thing happens at the end, right? The first 700 pages, you're just having build-up, and that's Breaking Bad in a nutshell. There's a lot of build-up and build-up. And
that makes sense, that makes a lot of sense.
It gives room for the characters to just be human. I think that's amazing.
In hindsight, the slow burn is absolutely worth it. As I've noticed that throughout the show, there's less of a focus on the actual criminal activities of drug distribution, selling the drugs, so on and so forth. And there's more of a focus on what leads these characters to make the bad decisions that they do. What motivates these characters? What tempts these characters? What psychologically influences these characters? What are the influences in their life, both positive and negative, that led them to make the certain decisions that they made? It's that kind of thoughtful, slow process that leads to such rich characterization throughout all the characters you see in the series, who are all brilliantly cast and performed to a T in some peak performances.
I am not turning down the money.
Please, please just hear me out, please.
Seriously, some of the performances get so good that Bryan Cranston's performance as Walter White was applauded by Sir Anthony Hopkins, so I've heard. And that's a high achievement if you get a Shakespearean actor to applaud you. The show is even more interesting in the fact that it doesn't take itself too seriously from time to time. It does allow itself to be made fun of from time to time. which leads to some surprisingly funny moments. And it helps that Bryan Cranston, prior to Breaking Bad, had been working in a lot of sitcoms, most notably Malcolm in the Middle. So when Bryan Cranston needs to be funny, his timing is brilliant, as well as his awkward physicality as Walter White from time to time. This show as a whole can be surprisingly funny when it wants to be.
Mr. Bryan Cranston perfectly summed it up in a recent Hot Ones interview.
But if you're doing a film or a television show that's carefully scripted, if the character realizes something's funny, it takes the onus off the audience to laugh because they're doing it, you're doing it. It's the same thing when a character easily cries. If a character cries easily, the audience doesn't have to. But if a character tries not to cry, that's when the audience will.
Even some other actors portraying characters that you think would be very stereotypical at first begin to get a lot more depth over time. Like Jesse Pinkman starts off as this very typical dropout junkie loser, but over the course of the series, he makes more meaningful connections and he becomes one of the emotional cores of the show, which works brilliantly as a contrast to the moral degradation of Walter White's pride. And it's for that reason, yeah, thank God that Vince Gilligan decided to keep Jesse around. Jesse, wake up! Wake up! Throughout the rest of the show. I honestly don't think the show would have worked so well without Jesse. Jesse! He really establishes one of the emotional cores of the show, especially when you analyze the series from the point of view that Walter White sees Jesse as a son, if not more so than his disabled son, Walter Jr., aka Flynn.
It's also that in this show, everyone's a sociopath. And, except for Mike Mike and Walter Jr. I was gonna get to that. Flynn, or just call him Flynn. Those two. And if you are preoccupied by people who, if you surround yourself and if you've lived with sociopaths or are one yourself, then of course that's all you will ever know. So I think if you don't know anything else outside of that, and could you blame the people who would do that? Like when that's all they could ever know.
I mean, it's interesting you bring that up because, yeah, I mean, this is clearly the kind of setting where it seems sunny and mundane on the outside, but deep within.
Yeah, it's it's not like The Walking Dead where you are surrounded by the darkness everywhere you go. Yeah. So that's why it's more, whenever there's levity, it's more lively than, say, The Walking Dead.
Oh yeah, by a long shot.
The liveliness is a rarity. It feels like, but because you're in Breaking Bad, it's in a mundane setting. But even in Attack on Titan, they say that the walls, that it's a more allegory on the walls, what keeps outside and what you're keeping in. So I think if we had to combine Breaking Bad and Walking Dead together with Attack on Titan, and we could say Breaking Bad is more the inwards of society, the walls, inside the walls, more life inside that, and outside the walls is more like The Walking Dead.
It's interesting you bring up The Walking Dead because a lot of people tend to compare Breaking Bad with Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead.
They're both AMC.
Both AMC, right. Walking Dead and Breaking Bad are both AMC, but people also compare it, Breaking Bad with Game of Thrones in terms of adult American-made drama series. But the main thing they get out of that is every single time is that Breaking Bad remained the most consistent, had the most satisfying ending out of the bunch.
Yes, and it did.
It's very interesting to see that there's various ways you can interpret it. Although, interesting enough, there are some people who try to interpret the Breaking Bad series from a political point of view, as if to say, oh, the rich oppression of the middle class was to blame for the way Walter White acted out as he did. But a friend of mine in response said to that, to paraphrase, that's a baloney interpretation, because whether Walter White was struggling or not, that still does not excuse the immoral actions that he does throughout the series. Even though the first 3 seasons are a slow burn, a minor spoiler alert, but it's not really giving anything major away. In the first season, there's one fascinating episode where Walter White comes across former colleagues of his who co-founded this company he used to found, called grey matter. You see, Walter White is extremely talented with chemistry, and he holds this deep-rooted resentment because he sold off this money for the grey matter company and sold off his potential so he could provide for his family, but he, to this day, has this deep-rooted resentment that he was denied the possibility to showcase his chemistry talents to the world through the grey matter company that he founded with Mr. Black. I mention this because there's this episode where he meets up with his former colleagues, and in light of his cancer diagnosis, his former colleagues offer him an opportunity to work at grey matter, and via charity raising and working at the company, they can provide him with all the resources he needs to not only look after his family, but possibly even cure his cancer, if possible. And this is obviously the opportunity of a lifetime that Walter would have needed. This could have been his chance to work at grey matter. But no, Walter White denies this. I mean, why? That doesn't seem like a rational decision. That seems like the most morally worthy, rational decision that you could make in that decision. But we see in the later conversation that Walter has this deep-rooted, anger-based conversation with his fellow colleagues, which concludes in the most deeply spiteful, resentful F-you delivery I have heard from any character.
Something that fascinates me about the show particularly are all the opportunities that are put in front of Walter White and how he responds to them. I would make the case that, and I really need to make a video about this, I'd say the most important decision made in that show is right in season 1, where Walter White's at this formal party and he's coming across his former colleagues who founded the grey matter company, and one of them comes up.
Yes.
Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's when
that's the decision to go away from them instead of getting their help. That's the decision that propels him to continuing his work with doing drugs, right?
Exactly.
Manufacturing drugs.
Exactly.
And that's also an important aspect of it. It is his pride. He could have accepted the grey matter deal, but he didn't, and they ended up making millions without him. So he missed out on the big opportunities in life because of his own pride. And that makes this story almost feel very biblical.
Yeah,
in a way.
Yes, pride comes before the fall. That pretty much summarizes this entire series in a nutshell. Just as much as what should it profit a man if he gains the world but loses his soul? And now that applies to the prequel series Better Call Saul.
But here's the thing, with all those people who don't have the opportunities to do that, or, I mean, okay, that Walt did have the opportunity, who could have done
Yeah, that's
but
clearly
I
established
think
in the show.
I know that there's the whole tragedy aspect of it. It's also the matter of what would you leave behind.
There could be a lot of psychoanalysis on Walter White's motivations, I think. I'm sure there have been a million videos as to why, but like, if you think about it, nothing would have really satisfied that guy.
Yeah, quite.
Like, what could he have achieved? What could he have gotten that would have satisfied him? He was kind of stuck. People say it was his ego, his hubris, his pride, all of which I think are great reads and very accurate. But also, like, what is it that he needed? What is it that hypothetically, that soul needed to not want to do more and more and more? He needed more money. He needed more recognition. He needed more quality. When would it have been enough? It wouldn't have been enough because, like, would he have stopped if, like, Skylar was a more loving, like, wife? Would it have stopped if he had just divorced her and moved on? Would it have stopped? Like, what would it? I'm not saying that that's what it was, by the way. I know Skylar gets a lot of hate as a character. The point is, like, what would have been enough? What was it that soul would have needed to not do all of that stuff,
Yeah.
I don't know. Interesting. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because they established early on that Walter is trying to control everything, and he's such a narcissist.
This kind of characterization reveals the truth right there early on. Other characters and perhaps even other audience members probably won't even notice this, but Season 1 spelled out the core truth of the show right all along. Like, the question is, how can a good man go from good to bad? Here's the truth right in front of you in season 1. Walter White was never a good man in the first place. He was always this deeply resentful. He was always this deeply prideful. It's just that with the sudden realization of his cancer diagnosis and the opportunity to cook meth, this was his opportunity to lash out, his opportunity to showcase his true prideful self to the world in a way. He was always this deeply immoral monster. It's just that this was his opportunity to showcase how monstrous he could be. Instead of reconciling with his past and finding redemption and providing the best possible source of charity for not only himself, but also the family he claims to be helping, no, he rejects all that because, as he overtly states in the finale, spoiler alert, but given the direction I'm going in, you wouldn't really be surprised, he confesses by the end that he was never really in it for his family. He did it for himself. He says he was good at it, and it made him feel alive. Throughout the show, Walter White continuously makes increasingly immoral decisions to the point where in the final season, he is an absolute, unquestionable, immoral monster. And yet, much of the audience will still sympathize with him, not because they agree with him, but because they can at least understand him. Because they can understand the frustration with the disappointments of the mundanities of life and missing out on the promise of adventure and the lost potential of showcasing your talents. People can understand that, even if they disagree with the mindset of Walter White. There's another scene early on in season 1, which really fascinates me.
You look at Walter White, and if you're paying attention, there's a lot of underlying unhealthy behaviors throughout the series. There's, the vast majority of characters has these traits as well. But obviously, this is about Walter White at the end of the day. So Walter White showcases traces of very toxic traits of trying to project himself onto people who he deems will carry out his legacy after he's gone, or viewing things through a very materialistic lens at the expense of any kind of moral integrity and intelligence and things like that. And you get that with a flashback early on where he's with some colleague and alone in some big meeting room of some kind. He's got a chalkboard and he's saying to a colleague, I'm absolutely baffled about this one thing. Okay, science can solve this, but it cannot solve the 1%. But there's this 1% that the empirical science cannot measure. Fun fact, the 1% still has not been solved to this day. So the colleague says, oh, it must be a soul. Walter White scoffs at the idea, nothing but bones here, but he doesn't answer the objection. The 1% is still there.
Yeah, that scene is also interesting, and it does show a bit of, a biblical dimension, right?
Right.
Because of course the devil would not want you to believe that you have a soul.
Right.
And that makes it more interesting, because if you don't have a soul, what is there to corrupt? What is there to lose?
This delves deep into something that really plays into Walter White's character. You see, Walter White is undeniably a materialist, and that would explain a lot about his mindset, because materialists have this habit of trying to box all of reality to make it comfortable, to make it comprehensible, to make it organized for themselves. But that doesn't work, because life is so much more richer than that. It takes a prideful person to think that they can control anything and everything. In fact, trying to think you could 100% control everything is an unhealthy mindset that can lead to a whole wide range of unhealthy actions and symptoms, such as pride or OCD or a number of other things. You have to take into consideration that Walter White's profession is in chemistry, but chemistry can't tell you anything about the metaphysical nature of morality. So if Walter White is no expert on morality, then you have to take into consideration that as much as empirical science is a handy tool to have, it cannot measure everything. Empirical science can't tell you anything about the metaphysical realities of our everyday life, such as the laws of logic, which Walter White depends on day by day. The law of non-contradiction, does that grow and decay like physical things? Does that grow in shape? Does that shrink in shape? Is it something you can see under a telescope via atoms? No. It's this abstract yet absolutely fundamentally real aspect of a reality that cannot be empirically measured. Other metaphysical realities that cannot be empirically measured, such as meaning, like when we read a sign or write mathematics down on a purely material basis. All it is just ink and plastics and all kinds of material stuff. But in order to interpret meaning, we have to appeal to the metaphysical reality of reading and understanding things. And mathematics are also metaphysics. Numbers don't grow and decay and stuff like that. Numbers are also metaphysical, and morality is metaphysical. The empirical science can tell you how cyanide can kill a person, but it can't tell you why that's wrong. You have to appeal to the metaphysical reality of universal morality in order to talk about anything moral. And perhaps Walter White could object and just say, oh, well, this is just subjective to the brain. But that presupposes the metaphysical reality of consciousness. You see, materialist physicalists have tried to explain how material things can create conscious beings, but they failed because they're using the wrong lens. You cannot get consciousness from non-conscious matter. If we were to say our thinking is delusion, then why should we trust it?
He's a man of the science, but he's clearly not in tune with his moral code, as it were. And it's something to note, people. You could be smart and still be completely dumb in another area. I think Hank even said it himself, like, you're the smartest person I know, but even you're too stupid to see. He made up his mind 10 minutes ago.
Yeah. I actually think that everyone is smart in some way and really stupid in others. I don't think you really have people who are just, they don't have points where they're weak, you know. Strengths and weaknesses is just a very real thing. You can't be good at, although it's, sometimes it seems like some people are good at everything and win all the cards, you know what I mean? Some people are better at more things than other people, but no one is good at it.
So I mention all this because I think it plays a crucial role in understanding Walter White as a character. He wants to control everything. He wants to be the superior being of his land, and certainly he becomes the kind of monster he aspired to be by the final season. But of course, given the fact that this is a tragic story, this is not only a story of Walter White's rise to power, but it's also a story about his drastic downfall. I mean, I knew that his downfall was coming, but good grief, I didn't expect his downfall to be as harsh as it was. My good grief. I mean, this show is rather depressing, and I mean that in a good way, because this is the cautionary story of our modern age. The kind of cautionary tale that tells us that even the most seemingly harmless individual is capable of such atrocious evil.
Maybe like the last season, I think, starts to kind of get to that Breaking Bad area. But Breaking Bad from beginning to end is very grimy. All of it is just kind of uncomfortable to watch. Like there's very little breathing room in that series. If somebody asked me which one I would rather watch, I'd probably say Better Call Saul, just because it's easier.
That makes sense. I suppose there's that quality of shock value when it comes to the Breaking Bad series, and I suppose in regards to the griminess of things, like, I've seen worse. I literally just got back from seeing 28 years later. There's some pretty intense gore in that movie.
Right, but that's actually not the kind of grimy I'm talking about. I can handle that way easier than Breaking Bad.
Oh, wow.
Because, yeah, well, when you get into, like, gore and zombies, it's different. The kind of grimy I'm talking about is, like, believable, awkward, like, human element. Like, the conversations, like in season 1, when Walter White is, like, having conversations with his family, it's just awkward and grimy. Or the kid who shoots the guy who's peddling drugs on the sidewalk. He's like a 10-year-old kid. He shoots that guy. Yeah. I'm talking about, like, that really, like, grounded, like really believable kind of stuff. It's gross feeling when you're watching like Walter White's interactions with his family and stuff. It's that. Like
Right.
that's a lot more uncomfortable for me compared to like gore, bones, because that stuff's so out there. You know, it doesn't feel relatable, but
right,
to the point that makes me uncomfortable.
Right, that makes
Breaking
sense.
Bad is a lot more grounded, and I'm like, ugh, I don't really want to watch this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want to watch it. It's like a train wreck, though. I'm remembering the scene where they're having like a family barbecue in Walt's backyard, and he's like drinking whiskey with Hank, and then he has his son start drinking until he throws up.
That's right.
And it's really uncomfortable to watch because he like gets in Hank's face. He's like, give me the bottle, you know? I was like watching that. I was like, what the hell is going on here? That's like harder. That's like more shocking to me than the kid, because the kid thing is almost it's bordering like shock value stuff. The other thing is like this. Like I could almost imagine this happening in someone's backyard in Albuquerque.
Oh man, yeah.
And the thing is, I've only reached the tip of the iceberg with this. I mean, this is Walter White's story at the end of the day, but even within Walter White's story, there's so many richly detailed characters that are brought into Walter White's life. Whether you've watched the prequel Better Call Saul or not, you get the impression that the criminal underworld machine has been going on, as well as people's everyday lives outside the criminal underworld. And here comes Walter White, this time bomb catalyst of a character who just destroys the lives of everyone around him. And the story is made all the more profound when you look into other characters. Like I said before, Jesse Pinkman ends up having a lot of emotional depth. And Walter White is not the only notorious villain that the series has to offer. You've got other notorious villains throughout the series. The most prominent one starting off with Tuco of the Cartel family. And then you get the infamous Gustavo Fring, the Chicken Man.
It's the Chicken Man!
And in the final season, you get Todd, the neo-Nazi family member. All these prominent villains do these absolutely atrocious things throughout the show, which will absolutely shock you to your core. So shocking that they'll even shock Walter White multiple times. The show is really engaging when you see the tension rising and you see Walter White try to outwit these dangerous opponents. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I misquoted. Isn't Walter White the danger? It's interesting how in this kind of series, whilst Walter White is a villainous protagonist, he's come across other antagonists who are also villainous. It's interesting how the definition of protagonist and antagonist works. In most stories, the protagonists are the heroes and the antagonists are the villains. You know, the protagonist is the main character we follow and the antagonist is the person who opposes the protagonist. But here's the thing. That kind of definition doesn't always have to mean protagonist is hero and antagonist is villain. It just means the antagonist is someone who opposes the protagonists. But so then you have these stories where the protagonist is the villain and the antagonist is the hero. Or in Breaking Bad's case, the protagonist who is this anti-hero who gradually becomes the villain, and then his main antagonists are other villains in the criminal underworld who are getting in his way to his rise to power. So it's interesting how you start off with Tuco, who is a family member of the Mexican cartel, maybe not the most influential, but certainly in a significant part of leadership and certainly enough of a wild card to disturb Walter White enough to try to get him out of the way. And then there's Gustavo Fring, which basically offered the actor who portrayed him such an iconic role in television that he's practically been portraying the same role for the rest of his career, let's be bluntly honest. Whenever people see him promoted in that Far Cry game, they just think, oh, it's the Chicken Man. And I like how there's these different characters who offer different kinds of intelligence in this immense battle of wits that's going on. People have estimated that 4 of the characters with the highest IQs would be Walter White, Gustavo Fring, Saul Goodman, the criminal lawyer, and Mike Ehrmantraut, who a lot of people really like. Saul and Mike tend to be the less sociopathic of the bunch because as much as they've done absolutely horrible things, there are still people that they care about, whereas Walter and Gus are notoriously cold by comparison. And we see their different forms of villainy play out and negatively impact others in many ways. With Gustavo Fring, we see that he's a pleasant man on the surface, but due to his long-term strategic patience and his cold corporate nature, he is absolutely shocking in the things that he does as a drug kingpin, to the point where Walter White wants to be like him. And this forms a very interesting form of battle of wits as to when Walter White gets to the point where he gets to working for Gustavo Fring. He's in a higher state of power, but there's this tension between the two of them, which stagnates and rises to the point where it becomes an outright battle, more of an overt battle, by the end of season 4. Seriously, I was on edge by season 4 just due to the sheer intensity. The show had become exceptional by this point. The show does an excellent job at highlighting that even though these villains are absolute monsters, the fact that it is in a televised slow format, you understand why these people act the way that they do. You don't agree with them, but you just understand them. That's what makes them such human characters in a way. So with Gustavo Fring, you understand his long-term ruthlessness because he's trying to get revenge on somebody. With Walter White, he makes increasingly immoral decisions, which at times even shakes himself, and yet you understand why he's doing that. He's trying to prove himself. He's trying to find worth in this false sense of identity. With Mike Ehrmantraut, he wants to make life simple, but perhaps he's made life a bit too simple to the detriment of the people that he's threatened. And with Saul Goodman, he's a lawyer who is a scam lawyer, but he seems to genuinely care about the clients he's trying to help, even if they're criminals. I mean, I could go on and on about all these different characters. I could go on about the development of how Skylar and Walt have this back and forth dynamic as to who's in charge and how their relationship grows and stagnates and all things like that. I could go on and on, honestly. Like the timing of certain events, like these men are about to kill Walter White as he comes out of the shower, only for Gustavo Fring to call it off. They walk away, then Walter White notices this teddy bear eye is a bit out of place and goes, and then the episode just ends. This show has one of the best examples of setup and payoff. This is a classic, fundamental aspect of storytelling. Setup is where you establish what's going on, key things, key items, key events, key characters, and then the payoff is how all these things come into play and what kind of climax does it provide for the characters. Like a basic example that comes to my mind right now is the setup of the One Ring from Mordor and its effect on Middle-earth, and the payoff is Frodo and Sam and others team up to eventually destroy the One Ring. Throughout the series, there's a lot of examples of setup and payoff, and the show is told in a somewhat non-linear format where the show will use flashbacks and more prominently flash forwards to highlight some very prominent, ominous events that are about to occur. So there's this tension that builds, and then we see the payoff based on the characters' decisions and actions. And needless to say, the actions of Walter have devastating consequences, and they become increasingly devastating. There'll be certain characters that were introduced earlier. It's amazing how Vince Gilligan has been able to find a way to pay off what he was making up on the spot.
There's actually a quite interesting process with how Breaking Bad as a series was made, and this quite rather surprised me because the series seems so structured. Apparently, the vast majority of Breaking Bad was improvised.
A lot of it was being made up and altered episode to episode.
People have often cited Breaking Bad as one of the best examples of character writing and remaining consistent. I did a bit of research on it, actually, that the writers rarely planned a season ahead, and their writing consisted entirely on the consequences of the character choices, which I think is a pretty interesting approach. Yeah, that completely surprised me, but, I mean, it certainly explains the quality of Season 1 and Season 2, and then by the last two seasons you get a sense of, okay, now we know which direction they're going, but it surprised me to learn that they didn't structure their series like Watanabe did with Cowboy Bebop. They didn't work backwards all the way to the beginning. They weren't from the beginning and just keep consistent with the premise, and then they kept thinking, okay, well, how would this character react to this? Oh, let's consider that. Okay, what would it do to that? I mean, they were improvising a lot, but they kept the common theme of a man gives into his pride, and they were writing entirely from character consequence. That's a very fascinating approach.
I'm sure there has been another example of it, but I don't know of another show outside of maybe Better Call Saul that has done that.
I think that kind of shows something that we don't need the shows where it's just like, oh, they have to get from A to C. More interesting to see, instead of like this, they have to beat the evil guy. Instead, just does this, and it has all of these consequences. And then what are the consequences of this, and how does that affect future decisions? That also makes for an amazing story, I would say.
I'm honestly just astonished at just how this story was able to work, despite how improvised it was a lot of the time. They might as well have placed this on Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yes. And I mean, history isn't plotted out. If you read history books, it is just people making decisions at hand. So history in real life have a plot. That's why Breaking Bad feels so believable, because it is just sporadic, and that adds something to it, I would say.
Right.
How he was going to kill off Jesse Pinkman. Jesse! But because he stayed on the show, he found more ways to give Jesse Pinkman satisfying setup and payoff. Or there'll be other characters like Hector Salamanca, who is set up in an earlier season, has quite the explosive conclusion to his character, and there's other things like that. You'll see certain key items, you'll see certain events, you'll see certain characters, and all of them have some kind of payoff later on, and it's so satisfying to see, because usually writers who are not that good at storytelling will set up a few things, but they won't pay them off in a satisfying way, which can leave audiences just left in suspense, which can be deeply unsatisfying. But Breaking Bad doesn't make that mistake. It has the setup and has very strong payoffs, to the point where the finale of Breaking Bad is one of the best finales I've ever seen, up there with Cowboy Bebop and Naoki Urasawa's Monster adaptation. It's an excellent finale that is narratively fulfilling. In the finale, you see Walter just be this ghost of a man that he used to be. Kingpin criminal who named himself Heisenberg, named after that great German scientist. The money he got wasn't enough for a long period of time because he was following his pride. Even though he could have easily stopped by the end of season 4, he kept going, because he was in it for himself, and it led to the destruction of everyone around him, criminal or otherwise, and it led to his downfall. And the downfall is harsh, and he wraps up any loose ends in his own way, but even then, he's not doing it to redeem himself. He has no remorse for his actions, but at least he's being honest with himself. He does manage to achieve his goals, but what for? He's still soaked in self-righteousness. Even though he does say goodbye to his family, the last thing he does, the last thing we see him do in the show, is showcase such nostalgic reverence for the meth business. But the way he's doing it inevitably points back to himself. He is such a deeply selfish, self-righteous person who initiated the destruction of all the people around him, which is why this series is one of the greatest tragedies I've ever come across. To go any further would probably spoil what happens, and there's already a whole bunch of YouTubers who have analyzed different scenes, different character arcs, and things like that. If you want to watch Breaking Bad, I would highly endorse it. Although, with that said, there are a few flaws with this series. And I say a few because this is an excellent series, and every episode is worth it, arguably save for one. This Fly episode. Now, the Fly episode is a filler episode when you really break it down. And it was directed by the king of subversion himself, Rian Johnson, who would later on make the very divisive Last Jedi movie, and the also somewhat lesser but still divisive Glass Onion.
Rian Johnson was the director of at least 3 or 4 episodes of Breaking Bad.
And you have the iconic bottle episode where they're just trying to catch a fly in the lab.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Do you know who directed that episode?
Rian Johnson.
Yeah. Probably. I don't even think that's a very great. It's an okay episode. I think it works fine, but I don't even think that episode's all that great, and it's still one of the best things that guy has ever done.
One episode of The Fly, like this one, I thought it was a filler episode, and it felt like a filler episode because Walt and Jesse were in the meth lab, and there was this only fly, no drug lords, no DEA agents, just one fly, and it's just apparently it could get into the meth, and that's it. It's like a freaking Tom and Jerry cartoon, or like a SpongeBob episode where sometimes they have the most minor detail and they have to deal with it.
Well, Rian Johnson also directed a very critical episode in season 5, the one where Hank gets shot and then Walter has to.
Yeah, that one actually is pretty good. I think he did great on that.
I think that's his best work. I've noticed Rian Johnson seems to work best when he's on a leash, as it were.
Rian Johnson works best whenever he's not writing.
There we go. That's the thing. Yes, he seems vehemently obsessed with subversion for the sake of subversion.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's another part of like kind of what I'm talking about. Nobody would really like have been able to predict what would happen. Like that was what he was going for.
Right.
And ever since then, I don't think he's been able to let go of that idea.
At least it made for good memes of Walt trying to get the fly. That's probably the one setback of the series among a few. And honestly, the series is so good, any complaints you would have about it are nitpicks. That fly episode is filler, but, it's still the characters
But
we
it
love.
did come back, actually. I forgot how it came back, but...
Yeah, with the shoe, yeah.
Subverting expectations is fine in a series where it makes sense. You don't do that with space fantasy series. I don't really think it worked, personally.
Right. I suppose Breaking Bad does lend itself more to subverting expectations immensely.
It does. I think that was organically, before people had seen it, I think that show organically was kind of hard to predict. It was kind of hard to make theories about. But it's not because I don't think it was because the writers were like obsessively trying to figure out a way to deliver something that nobody could have predicted. I think they were just trying to make something that was interesting, believable, cool, unexpected, but not like that obsessive degree.
As much as it is funny to see Walter White try to swat this one fly that's getting in the way of his work, the vast portion of the episode is still him just trying to swat a fly, and it's not really progressing the story in a major way, other than this one conversation he has with Jesse. So the episode's not entirely pointless, it's filler, and I get it that sometimes you'll need episodes where we focus more on the characters just being people so we can get to know them more, but at the same time, you could pretty much skip the filler episode and you won't really miss out on much. So the ideal way to write a filler episode is to make it meaningful to the story in some way, and I think maybe they should have done a few more things with the Fly episode to make it more significant, like perhaps have more scenes cutting back to Walter's family about Skylar's current thoughts on Walter and Hank's current thoughts on Walter, so on and so forth, or even Holly's current thoughts on Walter, so on and so forth. There's a few other things you can point out and critique for sure, but other than those few complaints, I have very few problems with this show on a narrative basis. It really is an excellent show, which I would happily give an 11.5 out of 12. It is a masterpiece of a television series. If you haven't seen it already, I'd highly recommend you do so. Join me next time as I talk about the El Camino movie. See you then. ScotsThinker signing out.
Thank you all so much for watching. Special shout out to Squidbear, aka Brooks Gallinghouse, for his input.
Also, that one Jane chick was also in Sonic 3, and she's also Jessica Jones.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, so she was like. I've noticed recently that Jessica Jones set to return to Marvel, and I looked at her and I was like, is that Jane from Breaking Bad?
Yes! I knew that because I did actually see her in Defenders.
You can support his science fiction story on Patreon. It is essentially an alternative history science fiction of an extremely harsh future, and it's still in the works as we speak, so stay tuned. Next shout out, thank you to Alecks the Dish Smasher, who has been a very loyal commenter and Discord member and other associated roles of that caliber.
And I hope you have everything that you need.
I've got more than what I need.
Off
Fellow brother in Christ, as well as someone I've had the fortunate opportunity to meet in person. It was so great to see you, and I hope you're doing well with your studies. Another shout out to evprince, brother in Christ, for his contribution to this video. Thank you very much for your input, evprince.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do it.
He's probably the most well-known YouTuber to appear on this video, and on his channel, he covers a lot of edgy video games. So someday he hopes to make a similar science fiction edgy video game of his own. So if you want to support him, he's got links to his Patreon and merchandise, so on and so forth, over on his YouTube channel. Also, please give him some love and support. His channel recently got hacked and was nearly ceasing to exist, basically. So give him all your love and prayers. Much love to you, evprince. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel and share with your friends. If you enjoyed these reviews, feel free to check out my other content on the channel. And I hope to make more reviews like this in the future, so stay tuned for more. In the meantime, ScotsThinker signing out.
Wait! One more thing.
Pardon me, once again I fart during the recording. The story is centered around a family man by the name of Walter White, who is an overqualified high school chemistry teacher. What is chemistry? What is chemistry? Mommy, what is chemistry? Give me the milk, mommy!